Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Camille Moore with Connect, and I'd like to thank you for tuning into Protecting Your Choice of Events AV Provider Begins with the Venue Contract with Heather Reed. Before we get started, there's just a few housekeeping notes on the platform. You can type in your questions for Heather in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen or via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'd like for this to be an interactive session, so please send in questions throughout the webinar. A recorded version of this session will be available on demand on our website, where you can find additional on-demand webinars for any of you needing last-minute credit hours before CMP testing. Yes, you are able to watch our sessions on demand and still receive credits. For everyone joining us live today, the credit is approved for 1 credit hour towards CMP-IS Domain C Risk Management. We'll email the certificate tomorrow evening. For any of you future viewers watching this session on demand and not live, please email me directly at cmore@connectmeetings.com to receive your certificate. I'll share more information about our upcoming webinars at the end of the program, but let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank Grand Wayne Convention Center for sponsoring today's session. They have provided a video to share with us about its convention center.
Located in the heart of downtown Fort Wayne, Indiana's second largest city, is arguably the Midwest's favorite event destination. Grand Wayne Convention Center, recognized as one of the finest, most advanced meeting and event facilities in the U.S. Amid its sleek Euro-style architecture, flexible gathering spaces, amazing AV technology, and full staff of on-site professionals, there's an energy here that embraces every planner's creativity and encourages every imaginable capability. This 225,000 square foot facility boasts 18 meeting rooms, ranging in size from 600 to 50,000 square feet of perfectly appointed space. By design, Grand Wayne Convention Center is equipped and experienced to transform any ordinary event into something truly extraordinary. In-house and included amenities make every planner's job easier and every guest's experience more comfortable and memorable. Fully carpeted and climate-controlled event spaces, free high-performance Wi-Fi, free event management and hosting, free room set and furnishings are among the list. Here, planners save up to 15% more than in comparable cities and facilities. From the first hello to the last goodbye, planners and guests are truly at the center of it all, with Grand Wayne Convention Center's award-winning hospitality. Sky bridges connect the center with 2 full-service hotels and garage parking. Additional downtown accommodations are in the works, eventually offering more than 5,000 guest rooms citywide. Fort Wayne's welcoming downtown offers amazing amenities, suited for business, yet casually comfortable and all within an easy walk. You'll find more dining and more doing with nearly 25 restaurants and pubs, boutique shopping, botanical gardens, historic sites, Parkview field events, and ready-to-go navigation in all directions. Indiana may be known for its Hoosier hospitality, but it thrives in downtown Fort Wayne. Are you ready to go beyond convention and beyond expectation? Grand Wayne Convention Center is the ideal site for your next event. See and learn more online by visiting grandwayne.com.
How great does Grand Wayne Convention Center look for events? Thank you again, Grand Wayne. Before I introduce Heather, you'll notice a map on your screen about the upcoming events for 2019. If you have any questions, please contact my coworker, Mark Wong, Senior Director of Sales at mwong@connectmeetings.com. Now, Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Heather Reed. Heather Reed is founder and president of Planner Protect, Inc., a consultant agency dedicated to reviewing and negotiating balanced event contracts. To date, Heather and Planner Protect have saved clients in the events industry more than $8.5 million in real costs and reduced risk. With more than 25 years' experience as an independent event planner, Heather helps event hosts and industry professionals negotiate balanced contracts. Planners, venue representatives, and corporate events teams all recognize Heather as a trusted and knowledgeable expert in her field. She has received awards for her thought leadership and commitment to the field, including a Smart Woman in Meetings Award in the Innovator category and the Meetings and Incentive Travel Canada's Hall of Fame Award, also in the Innovator category. She believes passionately in educating event hosts and has delivered numerous presentations to North American meetings industry groups. Through educational videos, webinars, and training workshops, Planner Protect reaches thousands of event professionals every year. Heather is passionate about elevating event professionals' contract expertise to protect their event finances, preserve their reputations, and produce successful events. Heather, welcome. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you, Camille. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I do see a couple of chat threads that say that people aren't hearing things, so I'm just going to allow you to work your magic, and I will proceed. So thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to talk about what I think is a very hot button item or a topic these days in our industry, and that is about working with third-party AV providers. And I want to set some context and make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So it was fascinating to me quite a while ago when I learned that as much as 55% of a customer's audiovisual invoice could be paid by the in-house preferred AV supplier to the venue as a commission for the privilege of being identified as the in-house preferred AV supplier. And first of all, I was shocked that it was as high as 55% in some cases, in some venues. And that got me to thinking about, no wonder we are seeing language that is increasingly becoming tighter and more restrictive when it comes to choosing third-party suppliers as an event host. And I want to share a real-life example where a group did not do enough due diligence in reading the wording in a venue contract around choosing a third-party AV provider specifically. And what it said in their contract was that the group may elect to use an outside contractor for their main/general session, and no additional charges will be added. The group must use the venue's in-house AV provider for all other rooms. The cost for these AV services will be determined between the in-house provider and the group. And unfortunately, what happened, that was kind of glossed over or not fully understood, the nuances of the wording. And when it came time to choose their AV provider and to execute the event, what happened was they found out that being forced to use the in-house provider meant that their audiovisual contract was $40,000 more expensive using the preferred in-house provider than it would have been using their own preferred outside provider that they were able to bring in for their main/general session. So my lesson here is that we always have to read what a contract says, but what I want to give to everyone are some considerations for negotiating the maximum choice for third-party AV suppliers before the venue contract is signed and executed. So I do need to indicate to you that I am not a lawyer. I have been an independent full-service meeting planner for 25 plus years and have learned a lot over those years. And I wish I could say that they were all book learning, but as many of us know, some of our greatest lessons are learned the hard way. And I have learned some of these lessons the hard way. But I've also done a lot of studying and learning about how to negotiate the very best contracts that allow us to have the greatest flexibility when it comes time to executing our events. So I'm not a lawyer, and you need to consult legal counsel for actual wording or deciding on what wording is best. And I also want to indicate that this is not a discussion that will disparage any particular audiovisual company or companies. I have a couple of examples that I want to share, and I'm sure that many of you have stories and lessons learned as well. And I would ask that we are not naming companies. We can reference them as company ABC or XYZ. And I do that because what I know to be true about our industry is that we absolutely must have each other. We must absolutely rely on each other to conduct our business. The venue needs to conduct business and have us in their premises, and we need venues to be able to conduct our events. And so really, although we are a relationship and partnership-based industry, it still is our responsibility as an event host or as the group or as the client. It's our responsibility to ensure that any contract that is being signed really protects our interests. Obviously, it's been written by the legal counsel of those that are presenting the contract, and those legal counsels have been paid to protect that party, and it's our responsibility to put back into contracts language that will protect us and give us the greatest flexibility when it comes to choosing outside providers. And in this case, we're focusing today on audiovisual, but these kinds of considerations can also be used and extended to other preferred suppliers that we may encounter. Now, I like to use a hashtag in some of my social media and things like that. Hashtag not sexy, but essential, because there's so much in our industry that is bright and shiny and alluring that we want to include in our events and how to deliver our events. But what I know for sure is that in the dry and drab and dull content of a contract, we have to be careful, because if we don't really carefully pay attention to the wording, to the nuances, perhaps even to the lack of wording, we may find ourselves at the time of our event prohibited or constricted in what we can do and what we can afford because of things that, budget items that haven't been unearthed in our negotiations, or we haven't asked for them, we haven't locked them in. So my whole talk is not about the sexy world of audiovisual. It's really about the essential aspects that need to be in contracts. So with that, in that front end, let's get started into 12 considerations. And I want to start with a paper. It was a position paper written by the Exhibition Services and Contractors Association called The Freedom of Choice. And I thought this statement, and I'll give you a moment to read it, I thought this statement really articulated well why we need to be careful about the language around preferred suppliers in contracts. So I'll give you a moment. So in essence, what they've really clearly stated is that the delivery of our events is really our own responsibility. Yes, we are using a venue in which to host our event, but the delivery and the execution of that event is really our responsibility. And if we are, they've used the word forced, and I can say if we are restricted by budgetary considerations that we hadn't considered, or if the language is worded in such a way that we don't have other choices, or that choice becomes cost prohibitive, then we really aren't in control of how we are delivering an event. And so what I want to give you are 12 considerations. We as event hosts, and sometimes we call ourselves event hosts, or we might be seen as the client or the group, we, in my opinion, are solely responsible for delivering the message and the intent of our event, not the facilities that we use to host those events. But what I know is that responsibility doesn't kick in when we go to execute our event or choose our supplier. It really truly begins having maximum choice when we do our request for proposal for the venue, and then subsequently when we move to contract with that venue. So you may wish to curate or create your own language. You can work with a lawyer or really create simple language that reflects the 12 considerations that I'm going to give you, and insert that language as a need item in your request for proposal. If your event is really contingent on how it is delivered, the quality of the delivery by an audiovisual company, by the cost effectiveness of that audiovisual company, then you really want to address that need upfront in your request for proposal. And I would encourage you to list out some of the considerations that you feel are really important to how you deliver the event and how you can choose your AV provider. So let's jump in. The first thing I want to clarify is, are we all talking the same language when we use the terms exclusive supplier versus a preferred supplier? So just to be clear, and everyone assumes the same thing, exclusive providers are those services in a venue that are, there is no choice but to use those companies for that service. So in a venue, catering, for example, a hotel property typically owns the catering services for a meeting. A liquor service might be an exclusive. Your hotel contract may say that liquor can only be served by the venue. Power, if you are supplying power to a main room, to a trade show, power is often an exclusive service provided by a venue. So if you need to access power, you need to use company ABC that has been identified as the exclusive supplier for power. Rigging quite often is an exclusive service that's provided by a venue. So again, you are the only service provider you can use is the one that the venue has identified as their exclusive provider. Cleaning, security, there's lots of things that may be on an exclusive basis. And in some venues, audiovisual may very well be an exclusive service. Right now, in most venues, it is not. It is identified as a preferred service. However, I do know that there is industry chat around venues making audiovisual services an exclusive relationship. And so if we are booking venue space years out, we certainly want to be mindful of that potential trend and really make sure that our language around preferred suppliers and exclusive suppliers is airtight so that we don't get caught with, today it is a preferred service, but a year from now it may become an exclusive service. And I'll show you how we can protect ourselves. So a preferred supplier is one that the venue has established a relationship with, and they have come in and they are on a preferred or an in-house or an official basis. So the venue would like you to use their preferred supplier for services, but you are not held to only using those suppliers. You do have a choice. And today's talk is around those situations and in those venues where you do have a choice as to your audiovisual supplier. So as I mentioned, I want to give you 12 considerations. 11 of them are things that you can consider creating words around. They are ideas, they are intents, they are statements that you need to consider and perhaps put into a venue contract to give you maximum choice. The 12th one is actually a logistical consideration that I want you to be mindful of. And then we're going to finish up with a few tips that I have to just further help your negotiations around this particular clause or subject area in a contract. Now, I want to point out that these considerations are not in any specific order. I maybe should order them, but every event is different. Everyone's execution of an event is different. You may have some of these considerations that are just not relevant. You may have, this may spur on another thought about what you really need for your event to protect when you're negotiating a venue contract. So the first one is this. When a venue is talking about a preferred service, and in this time we're talking specifically about audiovisual, we want to have language that indicates that the venue should not restrict your right to use your own equipment and or the equipment of a third-party supplier. So right out of the gate, we want to make sure that we have language that doesn't in some way restrict who you use for a preferred service. Now, you want to make sure that you may even use the word unreasonably restrict your right to use your own and or third-party equipment, because you want to make sure that who you are using is licensed, they are insured, they're bonded, they're reputable. But really, the first consideration is that you want to remove any sort of restrictions or criteria that may impede who you choose. So that's the first consideration. The venue should not restrict your right to use your own and or third-party equipment. And you may want to add unreasonably restrict. The second consideration is around a situation where I learned a lesson the hard way. You want the venue's contract to disclose any existing union agreements or any contractual relationships that are in place or that will be in place at the time of your event. So I ran into a situation many years ago where I wasn't aware of there being union agreements that could affect my choice of audiovisual. And in fact, the particular venue had an existing agreement with IATSE, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, the IATSE union. And it turned out that the client was going to have IATSE employees shadow their own preferred AV provider, or they were going to have to outright hire the IATSE employees. And that was an unexpected situation, and it was an unanticipated budget problem, because now all of a sudden the client had to decide whether they were going to use their preferred long-term relationship provider, or they were outright going to use the IATSE employees in place at the venue, or have those employees shadow their preferred workers. And what happened was the client decided that their delivery of their event was of the utmost importance, and decided, in fact, to have the IATSE representatives simply shadow the preferred technicians. So they were sitting there being paid while the preferred suppliers' technicians were doing the work and executing the event. So that was a lesson for me learned the hard way, and I would encourage you to request that the venue discloses any pre-existing union agreements with, such as the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, the IATSE, IATSE, or any other contractual relationships that may be in place at the time of your event that will in some manner either impede the logistics or the budget of your event. So that's another statement, and it's an action item really for the venue to disclose what agreements are in place. The third consideration, and you want to build this into the language, is that if you were to choose an outside supplier, so you're not choosing the in-house preferred supplier, but you're going with a separate company entirely, that their access to the venue space is not restricted, and really they, as an extension of your team, should be subject to the same rules as you are while you're in the building. So you want to be mindful of setup times and teardown times. You want to be asking, does your in-house preferred supplier have additional privileges? What are those? Do they gain access to space earlier? Are they not supervised on the loading dock? What are the restrictions that your outside supplier may encounter? Are they the same for the preferred? Because you really want your outside provider to be treated the same as their preferred supplier. Your choice is part of your team, and they need to be treated the same. So being mindful of things like, and not limited to by any means, but like setup times, teardown times, access to the facilities. Do they have access to loading docks? Do they have to be babysat while they're on those loading docks? So you really want to have a clear discussion about the impact of you choosing an outside provider that may or may not be the preferred supplier, and what is that going to look like? And then you want to build those situations into your language in your contract. So you're protecting things like there is no supervisory fees. There is no limited access to the loading dock. There is no limited access to the rooms, etc. So being mindful that your preferred supplier is treated equitably and the same as the in-house preferred supplier. The fourth consideration that we want to look at is really speaking to the impact that exclusive services have on your preferred supplier choice. So we know that an outside AV provider may require rigging, they may require additional power, they may require hardwire internet or Wi-Fi access. So all of those things that might be needed by a preferred supplier, we want to be addressing those if they are exclusive services. So as I mentioned at the top, rigging and power quite often are exclusively provided by a named company at the venue. So what you want to be doing is having a discussion. What are the prices? Include a price list in your contract or identify the pricing, because really the pricing should be consistent for your preferred supplier as it is for the in-house preferred supplier. What are the costs for rigging and power? Getting those identified in the contract and locking them in. So I have heard examples where company ABC is in two different capacities in a venue. They may be in an exclusive relationship for power, but they are in a preferred relationship for audiovisual services. And unfortunately, I have learned of situations where if a group does not select company ABC as their audiovisual supplier, where we have a choice, then the exclusive services, such as power, the prices have tripled. So I am aware of a planner that went from a $10,000 power fee for their trade show to $30,000 fee for power for the same trade show when it was known that they were not using company ABC for audiovisual services. So knowing that this kind of practice may exist in some venues or with some companies, what we want to do is really carefully unearth what impacts do the exclusive services have on choosing your preferred supplier. So you want to be asking about the published price lists for rigging, for power, for Wi-Fi, for hardwired internet, anything that it could impact your choice, and have that fully disclosed and upfront for in the contract so that it's fully negotiated and is a non-issue when it comes time to execute your event. So someone just wrote that they find that power fees are waived with using in-house AV companies, but charge the standard power rates if we bring in outside AV. So that absolutely, so that's a better situation than the one that my colleague found themselves in where it was tripled. So absolutely, my bottom line here is that everything needs to be discussed in advance. And so if you're able to have, power waived for an in-house, maybe ask for one of that to be a concession in your negotiations, that the power is waived if you choose an outside AV provider. So it's all about creating what your needs and what your wants are. And for you to have maximum flexibility in who you choose, some of these items probably need to be on your need list, your concessions needed list for negotiating. Thanks for that comment, Sarah. The fifth consideration, quite often we will find language that speaks to patch fees in a contract. And I know that quite often it's like, well, I'm not paying patch fees. Well, in my mind, patch fees serve a legitimate function. If I'm bringing in an outside provider that then plugs into an existing system that is not the property of my preferred supplier, then really we should be paying for that access. But we should be paying based on a published price list. We should not just be blanketly paying patch fees if our AV provider is coming in and is self-contained. So if they're not patching into the house system or someone else's system, then there really is no need for patch fees. So have that discussion, make the distinction. If I'm bringing in someone that is self-contained and bringing in their own soundboard and their own speakers and their own microphones, and we aren't plugging into an existing system, then patch fees are a moot point. I would encourage you to, if you have multiple rooms, meeting rooms in your event, I would encourage you to make distinctions between patch fees in small breakout rooms versus patch fees for a main ballroom. You may look at patch fees as being a one-time charge per meeting room. It might be a one-time charge for the whole event. It might, so there's several ways of slicing it and negotiating. Figure out what is advantageous for you as the group, and then work with the property to determine what is fair to both sides when and if your AV company that you choose patches into the house system. So I bring that one up because I find that we use the term patch fee kind of loosely and just kind of as a coverall for talking about AV, and yet it is a very specific function, and we need to make sure that the language only reflects that very specific function. So again, it should be based on a published price list. You can have that in the contract. You can have it identified. You can have just the rates identified, and then also try to have that as a negotiable concession. Here's another lesson that I learned. It wasn't a big ticket item that I learned, but it was a couple $100 to my client. Sometimes you will find that lighting and lighting controls are withheld from being given to an outside AV provider. And in my case, lighting was provided, but the remote access to the lighting panel was not provided unless we paid for that remote access. And so it was just one of those, at the time I thought it was a hidden fee, but in fact it was a fee that I had not known to ask about. So my sixth consideration is to really be looking at what is and what isn't covered in your meeting room rental. Now, it doesn't matter to me at this point whether you're paying rental, but what is included when you are contracting meeting space. Is lighting and the access to the lighting controls included in your meeting room contract? If it's not specifically mentioned, I would encourage you to make it part of your deliverables or your language in and around AV providers, that they will have access, because we know that lighting is such an integral part of the delivery of an event. So basic lighting and lighting controls are typically included in the cost of your meeting room rental. Make sure it is. I'm sure that in your contract somewhere you've got the features of a meeting room. So things like stage units, perhaps it's an easel, perhaps it's a water station. Make sure that in there you've got lighting and lighting controls. but then that your venue cannot restrict or unreasonably restrict access to that basic lighting and lighting controls. So I'm hoping at this point, we're kind of halfway through, that I haven't lost folks and that these are clear. I'll just trust that you'll put any questions you might have in the chat feature, and I'll just keep marching along so we get through everything. So the seventh consideration is around language or setting the precedent that you don't want your outside AV provider to be treated differently than the preferred in-house supplier would be. So that means monitoring the activities of that provider. It could be by the venue security, it could be by the venue staff. Your choice of your AV provider is really a team member. They are an extension of your team, and they should be treated like that. If you don't have to be babysat walking around a venue, if you don't have to be monitored by staff, then neither should your audiovisual provider. You don't want to run into circumstances where that happens, because it really sets a distasteful environment for your team. So having that discussion up front when you're contracting with a venue is, how do you have any different protocols? Do you have any different expectations or treatment of an outside provider? Should I choose not to use your preferred in-house provider? So again, it's about really unearthing all of those kinds of things that we run into when we're on the ground and executing. We want to negotiate really clear terms so that we don't have those kinds of kind of uncomfortable situations on site. So this one is all about asking and creating language that indicates that you won't tolerate the monitoring or the babysitting of your team while they are at the venue. And that goes to say that you are obviously choosing suppliers that are bonded and insured and reputable. I mean, that's fair to the venue, that you are choosing suppliers that are known and not a fly-by-night. Then there may be some reason for having some supervision. But if you're using insured and reputable suppliers, there's no need for that to be, for their actions to be watched or overseen in some manner. And probably the one that we're all familiar with is number 8, which speaks to that the charging of access fees or surcharges or commissions for selecting an outside supplier, that simply those are not acceptable to us unless the venue is able to clearly provide a justifiable rationale for the charge. So again, this is about having really robust discussions before we contract and having that language transferred to the contract. So we want to have the discussion around what are the charges, what are the access fees, what are the surcharges associated, in full disclosure with me choosing an outside provider. Those should all be articulated and laid out in the contract. What you want to have is full disclosure from the venue's part, so that you have the full picture of what it's going to cost for you to use an outside provider. Because when it comes time to actually choosing who your outside provider is, then you'll be able to refer back to the contract to say, okay, I know that I'm going to have, these 3 different charges, and I'm not going to have these if I choose the in-house. So in Sarah's case, I'm not going to have power charges if I choose the in-house, but I'm going to have them if I choose an outside provider. So what we have to do constantly as planners is really scrutinize the budget, is really scrutinize what is the true cost of engaging the services of a provider. And if we are really clearly getting these charges in the contract in full disclosure, we will be able to do a much better job giving the rationale for choosing one supplier over another. So to me, this one's a very important piece. And as I said earlier, this might be something that you can use then once they disclose these fees, then you can use that as part of your negotiations and what is important to you to maybe get some of those waived as concessions for your event. But they can't waive them if we don't ask for them to be disclosed. This one is a very important piece if we are looking at contracts that are any length of time in advance of the actual event dates. So this one says that stringent language indicating that the venue does not have the right to impose new fees, surcharges, or commissions after the signing of the contract related to third-party suppliers. Now, as a sidebar, this kind of intent should actually be relevant to your entire venue contract. But right now, I'm speaking about preferred AV suppliers. You really want to have a statement that says that the venue can't add something new. So remember at the top of the hour, I indicated to you that there is some chatter in the industry about venues making audiovisual services an exclusive relationship. Well, if you are looking at a venue that does not have audiovisual as an exclusive service, you really want to lock in the fact that they can't make it an exclusive relationship, and then at the time of the event, you're bound to use them because they are an exclusive relationship. So by having this consideration written into the contract in language that works for you, then we avoid that possibility. So again, it says they do not have the right to impose new fees or new surcharges or commissions after the signing of the contract relevant to third-party suppliers. So again, I'll encourage you about the sidebar that this should be something you put as an overarching premise of a venue contract, but specifically it needs to be about preferred suppliers. The 10th consideration we want to be mindful of is that we are looking for the venue to make a statement that says that all fees and related charges to bringing in an outside supplier have been disclosed in the contract. So asking this of a venue then requires them to be completely transparent about where there are charges for things and where there aren't charges, and saying that they have been transparent, but they will be transparent when we request them to be transparent. I just did a newsletter for my readership on hidden fees, and I don't agree with hidden fees. I think that venues have fees that either we haven't known to ask about or that we haven't requested full disclosure. I don't think they're hidden fees most often. So this is really important for us to say the venue has taken responsibility for disclosing any relevant fees for me choosing an outside provider.
Heather, we have a question that just came in.
You betcha.
Someone wants to know, in negotiations, how much stock should you put into discounts that the venue AV provider may have in the contract?
Karen, what an insightful question. How much stock should you put into discounts? So I know that there's list price, and then there's the event price, and then there's the if you're a special client price, and then there's the, if you're really a special client. I know that from experience that pricing is a very fluid transaction. I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that. Although one of my tips, I think, Karen, you will find helpful, and I won't jump the gun here, but just stay tuned for one of my tips here, and it may help answer. But I would say that maybe a different tactic is not a discount on the pricing, but a discount on the master account if you use the in-house preferred supplier. That may be a different way of tackling it, because audiovisual companies will price in a way that they are securing your business, and we never know whether it's truly a true discount or not, or whether it's it's such an interesting experience is contract pricing. But stay tuned and see if I answer your question before I finish here. So thanks, Camille. So the 11th consideration is that truly at the end of the day, if none of this is able to be negotiated, that you really truly want to make sure, and you can ask this question, that that their preferred in-house provider has to be equitable in both equipment inventory, which is a very big distinction, reputation, and pricing. Quite often, you'll find that venues will say, well, if you will include the in-house in your RFP. Well, the point being that, do they actually have access to the vast amount of equipment and the inventory that you require to deliver your event? Are they on the same level as someone that you are looking to bring in? If it's a slide projector and it's just a simple standard setup, that may be one thing. But if you're bringing in complicated projection and imaging and things like that, the in-house provider may not even be able to compete. So I would encourage you to make sure that what you're working with is equitable in both inventory, reputation, and pricing. And my final one before we move on to the tips, this is more of a tactical or a logistics thing. And I've encountered this on site, and again, a lesson learned. When you are looking to have maximum flexibility in who you choose, so you want to be able to perhaps choose an outside provider, you need to factor in the fact that a venue or the preferred in-house supplier does not need to store the crates and boxes and pallets of equipment that your external provider brings in. So you really truly want to make sure that you factor in space. So in your requirements for space, if you potentially want to bring in an outside provider, please make sure that you are factoring in storage of their equipment while you are on site. Julie asks, what is your perspective about hotels who switch preferred AV partners between your contract sign and the event date? How and when should that be communicated, and is there any room for renegotiation? That's an excellent question, and so there's a couple of questions in here. What is my perspective? Well, my perspective is that potential situation needs to be addressed before the contract is signed. So you are asking for, and again, I'll come to this in my tip, you are asking for full disclosure as to who is in-house right now, what services are on a preferred basis, and when is their contract up for renewal. So that becomes known before you sign the contract. Your question, how and when should that be communicated? So if they've switched, to me, that needs to be an immediate notification. Again, however, you're at the latitude of the venue if you haven't discussed, communications protocols. So, do you expect to be notified in writing? Is it a phone call? Is it as soon as it happens? Is it within a certain number of days? That sort of thing. And is there room for renegotiation? Yes, because you can't get a yes if you don't try. Should you hold your breath? Perhaps not, but absolutely go back and try to renegotiate. Everything should be subject to renegotiation. Whether you're successful or not is a different something that I can't answer. So let's jump in. I know we've got a few minutes left and I want to get to these tips. So I want to remind you why this is so important, because it's having these discussions and having full disclosure and asking some of these, not so typical questions. We want to have maximum choice when it comes time to deliver the message and the intent of our event. And if we're not careful and we sign a contract without fully exploring all of the different possibilities and all of the different angles and all of the different budget impacts, then we are going to potentially limit ourselves in a very dramatic way. So you think about the client that I mentioned that took a $40,000 hit because they didn't really look thoroughly at the language around the preferred suppliers. They probably saw the fact that they were able to bring in their own supplier for their main/general room, but didn't go on to read the fact that it said that you have to use our in-house for all of the other space. So it's really being careful. And when does that responsibility kick in? Well, it kicks in with the request for proposal and it kicks in with the contract. So when you're looking at this, my tip number one is absolutely ask what are the services that are preferred? What are the services that are exclusive? You should ask for the company name. You should ask for what exact services are preferred and what exact services are exclusive. So making that list of those two and including those in your contract or in your addendums to the contract, that these are the pre-existing relationships and obligations that the client is agreeing to. Tip number two is the fact that you want to ask not only who is the provider, but when is their contract up for renewal? Because knowing that, if their contract is up for renewal after your event dates, then it may be a non-issue. If that contract is up for renewal before your event contract or your event dates, that is a whole other discussion that you then need to have. What if you switch providers? What if the new provider does not meet my standards? What if the new provider's pricing is, in a whole other league compared to what your original provider is at the time of contract signing? So there's lots of reasons why you need to ask for when is the contract up for renewal. My third tip, and I will come back to the question by Magdalena. My third tip is when you're doing the exercise of doing a contract, perhaps in your RFP, create a generic quote for the AV, the preferred in-house AV provider to respond to, because that then provides you with some leverage. It gives you benchmarking pricing. It also may disclose or uncover some unnecessary fees that you can then negotiate out. But it also, I have found that when that exercise happens, that then if I do choose, an outside provider, but I have that same company providing an exclusive service, then I've got some leverage to say, no, this really isn't, this isn't on par with what we anticipated at the time of contracting. Because the purpose of contracting is locking and loading in budgetary considerations. It's locking in how you work in the property. It's locking in the expectations that you have of the property. So we have to be really crystal clear in what we need disclosed, and pricing is one of those things. So I would encourage you just to do a simple generic RFP that goes along with your request for space. And my final tip is request the price list for ancillary needs such as power drops, rigging, and booth power. Though there should not be any backroom kind of pricing. Pricing for any charges at a venue should be as part of a price list. And I would encourage you to ask for that price list to be disclosed at the time of RFP. Again, it should come in full disclosure and in full transparency so that you know exactly what you're working with. And then you can also use that list to itemize how you negotiate your concessions. Because you may find that in this property, the power drops are unlike what you're used to. Maybe you need to negotiate a lower rate for that power drop. But we can only negotiate for what we know exists. We can't negotiate the unknown. So I want to close. I will take questions. I just want to skip over. I am such a huge fan of John Foster, who is a hospitality lawyer, and he has a saying, and I use this in all of my presentations: before a contract is signed, it's called negotiations. After a contract is signed, it's simply called begging. And I would implore you not to be in a position to beg for some latitude or for some budget, considerations. I would implore you to really look at these 12 considerations and build them into how you negotiate the clause in a contract around preferred suppliers. So with that, my presentation is done, but I want to address the one other question here. Las Vegas hotels are notorious for having AV departments unionized and therefore lack flexibility in negotiating labor/shadow fees if an outside production company is brought in. How would you suggest negotiating around that? Magdalena, that is a really good question, and I have to be really transparent here. I don't have a lot of experience in that marketplace. I did encounter, we have a couple of properties that my clients worked with regularly that did have that relationship in place, and it simply did come down to, budgeting for that shadowing. Now, you may be able to go in and ask, are there any internal restriction or like criteria that, so maybe it's, you don't have to budget for every single hour that they shadow. Maybe it's the core daytime hours that you have to have it shadowed. Maybe it's around certain services that absolutely need to be shadowed or pay the fees for. I would dig into those, just the specifications of their agreement. What is in their agreement, and is there any latitude within that agreement that you can realize some cost savings? But again, I mean, that may just simply be a fact that if you want to do business there, it's an exclusive relationship. But I would encourage you to dig deeper and ask for the specifications around their agreement with that property. So I know that's not a solid answer, but it's what I'm able to come up with. So I'm going to turn it back over to Camille, and I hope that this hour of your time has been a wise investment. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, and if there are no more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much, Heather, for presenting a great topic and presentation. After this webinar concludes, you will be directed to a short survey. If you guys could fill that out, that would be great for us to get some feedback. You can learn about Connect's past and upcoming webinars on all of our websites listed on your screen now. And for everyone joining us live today, the credit is approved for 1 credit hour towards CMP IS Domain C Risk Management. We'll email that certificate tomorrow evening. It will not come today, but we will email it out tomorrow evening. Again, if you're watching on demand, please email me for your certificate. It will not come to you automatically. And if you have any questions, you can reach me at cmoore@connectmeetings.com. And we all hope you'll join us again on October 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for an informative session on Wi-Fi and Internet with Connect speakers Will Curran and Brant Kruger, who will both be speaking at Connect Medical and Connect Tech. Thank you all for joining us and have a great day.